Nancy over this weekend. But right now we're in for a real treat as we have storyteller Mara Menzies, who's going to be sharing some of her favourite tales with us. So yeah, kids and big kids, I hope you're all ready now for some fantastic stories, and I'll hand over to the wonderful Mara.
Oh, thanks, Kirsty. Really happy to be here and really excited to be able to share some stories. In lockdown, we've, trying to tell stories on a digital platform is very different to being able to tell stories. And I remember the last time that I was at the Solas Festival, just sort of being in contact with people and having all the children and the families around is just such a special thing. So hopefully we can recreate that here. And I hope that you're as excited to hear some of these stories as I am about telling them. So I wonder what story we are going to start with today. So as Kirsty said, I am going to be sharing some of my favorite stories. And the one I'm going to start with is a story from Southern Africa. And it's a story from the San people. And the San people are an incredibly resilient people and one of the oldest peoples who have ever existed. So some of their stories are just fascinating. And this is one of my favorite. And it starts a long time ago when the world was very young and the people were quite new. And it takes place at a time when all the food in the world was raw. Now, you might be wondering that that's not such a good idea. And I don't know if I would like that either, because the potatoes that were pulled out of the ground were just crunched into like apples. All sorts of things were eaten and nothing was ever cooked. And the people, well, they didn't know any better. But one day, there was a man and his wife, and they were out there in their fields, and they were busy working away, and the sun was blazing down hot. Oh, they were wiping their brows. It was incredibly sweaty and probably quite stinky as well, when suddenly they looked up, and in the distance, they saw a strange looking cloud. This cloud, it didn't float across the sky like all the other clouds. No, this cloud appeared to be coming straight up off the top of a mountain. And they had never, ever seen anything like this before. And they said, I wonder what that is. And wife said to husband, I think that you should go and take a look. And well, husband was quite curious too. It was a long way to the mountain, and so wife packed a little bag with some fruit and vegetables, and she handed them over to her husband, and off he went. He walked along that path, and when he reached that mountain, he started to climb. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher he climbed until he was almost at the very, very top. And when he reached the very, very top, he saw a strange looking creature. This creature was sitting on the ground, and he had a little yellow hat flickering in the wind. He had an orange coat wrapped around him, and he had blue and purple shoes on his feet. And the stranger spoke to the man and said, "Who are you?" And the man said, "Well, I am man, and I have come to find out who you are." And the creature said, "I am fire, and I am here to bring joy and happiness to the people of the world. Come closer, man." And so the man, he went closer. And as he got closer to fire, he began to feel quite cozy and warm. He felt happy. And as he sat close to fire, they began to share stories. Now, if you can imagine some of your favorite stories, those are the kind of stories that they told each other. Fire told man all about the things that he could see perched at the very top of the mountain. And man told fire about his life in the village, about his wife and his children and his friends and what they did every single day. And fire listened fascinated. The two of them, they laughed, they cried, they just had the most wonderful, wonderful time. And the hours whizzed by until finally it was time for man to go home. But he was so happy to have met Fire that he asked Fire, "Fire, please, I am so in awe of your stories, and I would love for you to meet my family. My wife would love you, my friends would adore you, my children, my goodness, they would do anything for you. So please come down to my village and let us take care of you for a little while." But Fire, he said, "I'm sorry, man, but I cannot leave this mountain. I have to stay here for as long as I can." And no matter how much man insisted, Fire's mind would not be changed. And so Fire had to respect his friend's wishes. He said goodbye and he made his way down that mountain path. And when he got home, he told his wife everything. "Oh, I have met the most amazing friend. His name is Fire, and he's got all sorts of stories, and his view of the world is so different to ours, but it's fascinating." And he went out and he told his friends all about Fire, and everybody was intrigued, and they said, "Well, we'd really like to meet Fire one day." Man said, "Well, I did invite him, but he didn't want to come." But after a few weeks, Man thought he'd quite like to visit Fire again. And so his wife packed a little bag full of food, and she waved her husband off, happy that he was going to see his friend. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Higher and higher and higher and higher he climbed to the top of the mountain. "Fire! Man!" They were thrilled to see each other. Man immediately raced over and planted himself next to Fire, and the storytelling began. They told jokes, they shared riddles, story after story poured out, and just like before, when the time came for Man to leave, he asked Fire to come down to his village. And again, Fire said, "No, I have to stay right here on this mountain." And do you know, this went on not just once, not just twice. Weeks and months whizzed by, and Fire never accepted Man's hospitality. And, well, it began to bother Man. You see, his idea of friendship was that I would visit and then your friend would visit you. And he wanted to reciprocate the hospitality. He was a warm and friendly and giving, generous person. And so he insisted. He said, "Fire, you have no idea how happy it would make me if you were to come down to my village. Everybody would love you. Please." And Fire loved his friend, and he wanted to make his friend happy. So after a lot of umming and ahhing, he said, "Well, I would, but there's just one problem. You see, I have a huge appetite, and when I start eating, I don't know what's going to happen." And Man was stunned. "What? That's it? You have a big appetite? Do you know how much food we have back there in the village? Ha! We have plenty of food. You will never, ever, ever go hungry. If that's the only problem, forget about it. Just come on down." "Okay, I'll come." And Fire promised that in 3 days he would make his way down the mountain path. You have never seen a happier man. Man whizzed down that mountain path, and he told his wife, "Wife, Fire is coming, but he's got a huge appetite. So you go and organize everyone. We cannot embarrass ourselves. We have to have a banquet." He sent the villagers out, and they went down to the river. They caught the fish and they laid it in the sun to dry. They pulled out the potatoes and the carrots. They found the eggs. They got everything that you could possibly imagine. And in the center of the village, they piled the food high. They had never seen so much food. And the days began to go by. 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. And on the day that Fire was due to come, Man could hardly wait. He was beside himself. He looked out and he saw that strange cloud, that plume of smoke. It was beginning to make its way down the mountain path. Fire is on his way. He's on his way. And so Fire, as he made his way down his mountain, down the path, he was quite excited. This was his first time off the mountain. But as he traveled, he noticed those tiny little shoots of grass growing at the side of the mountain path. And ooh, they looked juicy and green and tasty. And so he thought to himself, oh, just a tiny little nibble. And he reached out and it was good. And so whoosh, he reached out and ate some more. And he continued to eat and eat and eat all the little blades of grass. And as he ate, his appetite began to grow. And as he went down that mountain path, soon the blades of grass were not enough. He began to eat the little shoots of plants, tiny little bushes growing at the side of the mountain path. He reached out, and the more he ate, the bigger he became. Soon his appetite grew so large that even the small bushes weren't enough. The larger bushes, and he began to tear down that mountain path. And as the villagers looked, they thought, oh, fire is actually quite large, much bigger than we had imagined. And man said, well, he's not really that big. It's just maybe the angle that we're at if he's coming down the mountain. But fire was on the move and he was hungry. He began to eat at the low branches of the small trees. And he was getting larger and larger, and the animals were afraid. They started to leap through the long grass. The birds were flying high, the insects buzzing to escape the smoke and the flames. And now fire was consuming everything in sight. Huge trees, even the boulders and the rocks. And he was a towering wall of flame, an inferno. And as he approached the village at raging speed, the villagers were terrified. They turned and they ran as fast as they could, headed towards the river, and they jumped in. And at that moment, fire hit the village. He consumed everything. He ate up the roofs of the houses. He even gobbled up the walls. All the furniture inside, everything was destroyed. He ate so much that there was nothing left to eat. And it was then that whoosh, he burnt himself out. And well, the villagers, when they saw that he had gone, they ventured out of the river and they made their way back to the village. And they looked around and they saw the destruction and they were heartbroken. And wife was not happy at all. Husband, you told us that this was your friend. You told us how wonderful he was, how full of stories he was, and look what he has done to our home. How could you do this to us? And husband, well, he felt terrible. He felt that he had been betrayed by his friend. He had trusted fire, and this is what fire had done. He was devastated. And as the villagers made their way through the village, trying to see if there was anything that they could salvage, when they reached the center of the village, they noticed something different. There was a smell in the air that they had never smelt before. And when they went to the center and they saw the mats that had been piled high with food, well, it all looked a little bit different. And wife, she saw a potato and she picked it up and it was hot to the touch, but it was soft. And when she broke it apart, she saw it was fluffy inside and it was delicious. She saw that the potatoes had been roasted. She picked up a carrot. It had been caramelized. Oh, the fish had been baked. The milk had been boiled. The eggs were hard and she could bite into them. It was incredible, a miracle. She had never tasted such delicious food. And she said to husband, oh, you go and you bring fire back. And husband, he said, absolutely not. Fire was my friend, and look what fire has done to our home. I am never, ever going to see fire again. And wife sat man down and said, look, man, fire is your friend. And like all of our friends, like you, like me, we also have a wonderful side, and we all have Another darker, more dangerous side. And we just have to find a way to balance it. Go and bring fire back, because look at this incredible gift that he has given to us. And well, man agreed, and wife packed some delicious food into a little bag. He threw it over his shoulder. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Higher and higher and higher and higher he climbed. And when he reached the top, who was sitting there, all shy and embarrassed? It was Fire. And Fire was terribly ashamed. And he said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I tried to warn you. I really don't know how to control myself. It's just not part of who I am. I'm sorry. And Man said, well, actually, I'm here to ask if you'd like to come back to the village. Huh? But I don't understand. What do you mean, come back? Look what I did. I destroyed your homes. And Man said, yes, but you also gave us this incredible gift of cooked food. It's wonderful. So if you would like, we would like to have you back in our community, in our village. And so Fire, he thought, well, okay, but how am I going to get down? You see the damage that I caused on my way to your village? And Man reached into his bag and he took out a bowl. And he said, if you jump into this bowl, I could carry you down. And that is just what Fire did. He jumped into the bowl. Man carried him all the way down the mountain. And when they reached the village, wife had prepared a little house for Fire, 3 great stones. And Man, he tipped Fire into the center of those 3 stones. And to this day, Fire still lives there. And he still keeps his promise of bringing joy and happiness to the people of the world. And that is my first story for you today. And so maybe next time you are at a campfire, or you're having a little barbecue, or you're just seeing flames, and we're all gathered around and it all feels nice and cozy and warm, maybe you could also tell that story so that people know how fire came to be with the humans. So I hope that you enjoyed that story. I'm going to be telling another story now. And this is a Scottish story. I thought I would tell a Scottish story. And it's one of my favorite Scottish stories. And it comes from one of Scotland's finest storytellers, who is no longer with us, but his name was Duncan Williamson. And he was from the traveling community. And he was a brilliant storyteller. And if you can imagine all the incredible stories that the traveling community must have gathered as they made their way across the whole of Scotland. Stories gathered here, stories gathered there, stories inspired when the har sets on the land, stories of all these incredible imagined creatures. So this is one of Duncan Williams' best known stories and one of my favorite Scottish stories. And it's a story of a young man and a young woman. And the young man, he fell deeply in love with this young woman. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever been in love before, but if you have, you will know what it feels like. So his heart would race, beat pounding in his chest. Oh, he would feel all shy and the color would flush to his face. He looked to the ground and I could hardly speak whenever he saw her. Oh, his hands were sweaty. His throat was dry. It was a complete and utter mess, really. And she quite liked him too. Whenever she saw him, she would tuck her hair behind her ear and she couldn't wait to just watch him as he walked by her in the street. And as these two, as the love began to grow and grow, they would soon go out for walks, holding hands, stealing kisses under trees. And it was a beautiful, beautiful love affair. And of course, they decided that they should get married. And it was a fantastic celebration. Everybody was out. They were partying. The fiddles were playing. Everybody was dancing, shaking to the side, kicking their legs up in the air, round and round, twirling and swirling, drinking and feasting and enjoying themselves until the early hours of the morning, and everybody collapsed with joy. Now, when people get married, sometimes they want something to happen quite soon after the wedding. And they waited and they waited for what? A little tiny baby. Yes, they couldn't wait. The little sound of patter, the little sound of mummy, daddy cries. Oh, they couldn't wait. However, they kept on waiting. And they waited and they waited and they waited, and there was still no baby. And if you guys have ever wanted something so much and it never comes, you will understand the pain of this couple. They were desperate. They asked the doctors for help. They asked the midwives for help. They asked their friends and their families. They ate certain foods. They drank certain liquids. They went for walks when the moon was in the air, and they drank the dew from the grass first thing in the morning. They tried everything. And did it work? Not at all. Until when they were on the verge of giving up, after years had gone by, they finally began to accept the fact that they were not going to have a baby. And as soon as they had decided on that, she became pregnant. Boom, boom, boom. Her belly swelled and grew and grew and grew. And 9 months later, there was a beautiful little baby boy, sparkling blue eyes, big fat cheeks. And if you've ever seen a baby, you know how they have lovely little wet lips and a bit of drool slithering down the side. And not only was this little boy beautiful, he had a happy, gorgeous, kind, and joyful nature. He laughed and giggled all the time. And his parents loved him more than anything else in the world. And this is an old story. So it takes place in a time when most people would have a little patch of land and they would grow their vegetables and harvest them for the winter. And so the young couple, well, they were out in their fields in the middle of summer, and they were busy weeding and watering all the vegetables that they had planted. And they had taken their little baby and put him in a nice little blanket in his cradle and shoved him under a little tree as they were working away. When suddenly the baby started to cry. And the mother immediately raced over to see if he was okay because, well, the baby hardly ever cried. And she tried to nurse him and give him some milk, but he cried and wailed some more, and he clearly wasn't hungry. So she checked his nappy, but he was perfectly clean, and still the baby was howling and wailing, and she checked under his clothes in case maybe he had been bitten by an insect, or perhaps there was something that was scratching him, a little twig or a leaf, but there was nothing to be seen. And by now, well, his howls and wails, whoa, they were loud. His little fists were clenched. He was punching the air. His little tongue was rigid, sticking out of his mouth. His face was changing color to pink and orange and purple and red. And she said to her husband, "Oh, there's something wrong with the baby. I'm going to take him home and I'm going to call the doctor." And her husband said, "Absolutely, go now, go now." So she took her baby home, and the doctor arrived and prodded and poked and pulled and checked and turned the baby over. And the whole time the baby yelled and screamed, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong. And he said, "Well, maybe just give it one night and see how he feels. Give him some milk and knock him out." And they tried everything. When the husband came home, he took his kid and gave the kid a bath. Did that solve it? No, the baby all through the night, and the following morning, if he wasn't howling and screaming, he was gurning. It was hideous, hideous. He never stopped. And on the Tuesday, it was the same, and the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday, and on Saturday, there was a knock on the door. And it was the postman. And when the wife opened the door, he was horrified. "What's wrong with you? You look as if you haven't slept in a month." "I haven't. The baby will not stop crying." And the postman peered behind her, and he saw The dad with his head in his hands, his eyes were sunken, his skin was grey, he hadn't slept in ages, and there was the baby in the cradle, yelling and screaming to the loudest possible ability of his lungs. It was awful. And the postman felt sorry for the couple. You see, he was a dad, and he knew that sometimes it can be quite difficult. So he said to them, I tell you what, why don't the two of you just go away, get some rest? I will take care of the baby. No sooner had he said that than the mum and dad jumped into their cart and they rolled away down the hill. And as soon as the sound of wheels had faded into the distance, the crying stopped. And the postman went over to the cradle, but there was no baby in there. It was a little old man, sparkling blue eyes and a long white beard. And he said, have they gone? And the postman was shocked and he said, well, yes, they've gone. And the little old man started to jump out of the cradle. Well, thank goodness for that. He stretched himself. Oh, that's better. Right, I am hungry and I am thirsty. All they gave me is milk. Do you like milk? I hate milk, disgusting stuff. And he started to look for something to eat. His eyes scanned the shelves and he saw a big loaf of bread, stale bread, but he tore into it. That's better. I need something to wash it down. And he looked up and on the top shelf, he saw a big bottle of whiskey. And he took off the top and he downed the entire bottle and he threw it out of the window. Terrible. And he was astonishing. He was full of life. And he said to the postman, he said, right, I want to dance. I want to party. I want to have fun. Play a tune for me, postie. And the postie, well, he knew how to play. And so he took the fiddle off the wall and he started to play. Reel after reel, jig after jig. And the whole while, that little old man, he danced and he threw his legs up in the air and he was spinning and twirling and having a wonderful, wonderful time. And the postman, well, he quite enjoyed this. It was great fun to watch this little old man having such a great time. And so he continued to play all the tunes that he knew, watching this comical little character, when suddenly they heard the sound of wheels coming back up the hill. And as soon as the mum and the dad stepped back into that house, wah! The crying started again. And they said, what on earth are we going to do? This is a disaster. What has happened to our beautiful, darling little boy? And the postman, he said, well, tell me, how did this happen? And they explained how they'd just been out in their garden and suddenly the baby started to cry on Monday. And he said, oh, well, that was Midsummer's Eve. And that was Midsummer's Day. And it's when the fairies can come into our world and they take the human babies and replace them with one of their own. The postman leaned in and said, that is not your baby. That is a changeling. And you've only got one day before the change is permanent. And they said, oh no, this is a disaster. Well, what can we do? How do we fix it? How do we get our baby back? There's only one thing to do. You have to take your baby and you have to wrap him up in a blanket nice and tight. Then you have to walk up the mountain path behind your house. And when you reach the top at the waterfall, you have to take your baby and you have to throw him in. What? Are you mad? Are you crazy? They looked down and they saw the empty whiskey bottle and they said, you've been drinking, you're absolutely drunk. What? We will never, ever throw our baby in the waterfall. No, absolutely not. You're talking nonsense. And the postman, he said, well, I'm sorry, but that is not your baby. But he had other things to do. And so he said goodbye and he waved his hand at the couple and off he went down the road. And the whole time, the baby cried and screamed. And the parents said, well, obviously we're never going to throw the baby in the waterfall, but maybe we could just go and have a look. And so they did. They wrapped the baby up in blankets nice and tight. and they put him on their shoulder, and they started to walk up the mountain path behind their little house. Higher and higher and higher and higher they climbed, and as they got closer to the waterfall, they could hear the rumbling, thunderous sound. Oh, they kept on climbing higher and higher the whole time, listening to higher and higher and higher. And as they got closer, they could feel the icy spray on their faces. They climbed higher and higher, and at the very top, they looked down and they could see the jagged rocks beneath. They could see the foaming, swirling, crashing white waters. We are never, ever going to throw our baby in there. It's not possible, they said. And at that moment, the baby gave the most hideous, the most awful, the most ear-piercing screech that you could imagine. If you're at home, maybe you want to try this as well. Can you give me your loudest, most ear-piercing screech? Sorry, parents, if you're listening, but let me hear it. Oh, it was terrible, worse than fingernails on a blackboard. It was awful. And the parents said, we have to throw the baby in. And they took their little baby. 1, 2, 3. Whoosh! They threw their baby into the waterfall. And as they held on to each other, ashamed and terrified of what they had done, they saw the little bundle flying through the air, and they saw the blanket begin to unravel. And they saw his tiny little fists, and he was punching the air. But then they saw a long white beard, and they heard a voice. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? And he was gone, disappeared. And the mum and dad, well, they stood empty-handed at the top of the waterfall, and they were terribly sad. They didn't know what to do. And so they slowly and sadly walked down that mountain path and headed back to their home. And as they were walking up the little path that led to the doorway, they heard something. It was the most beautiful sound that they had ever heard. It was a It was their baby. They rushed in, and there he was in his cradle. His little fat fingers started to reach out for them, and they picked him up and they cuddled him and they held him tight, and their baby was home. But they do say that if you ever go to the west of Scotland, be very, very careful. If you reach a place where at the top of a hill there is a waterfall, and at the bottom of the waterfall there are jagged rocks and foaming white water, because if there were fairies then there are probably fairies now. So there you go. A little story about the changeling, a lovely fairy story, and one of my favorites from Scotland. So I am going to finish off with a tiny, weeny little story. And this story I learned quite recently from one of my favorite storytellers. His name is Usifu Jallo, and he also is called the Cowfoot Prince. And maybe if you ever see him, maybe you could have a look and see if he actually does have a cow's foot as a foot. I'm not going to tell you. But yeah, he told me this little story, and I thought that it would be quite a nice little story to finish with, because we are going through some mad, crazy times right now, and sometimes it can be difficult to know how we feel about an awful lot of things and how to get ourselves out of a lot of things. So I thought this might be quite a nice little story to finish with. And it's a story about 2 friends. One friend was Frog, and the other friend was Rabbit. And Frog and Rabbit were jumping and hopping and skipping their way through a forest, when suddenly To their astonishment, there was a great big hole, and Frog, he lost his footing and whee, boom, he found himself at the bottom of the hole. And he tried to jump out. He tried his hardest, but nothing happened. And his friend Rabbit tried to help him out, tried to pull him out, lowered his ears and said, grab on, grab on. But the hole was just too deep. And so Rabbit said, you wait here, my friend. I am going to get help. And so off went Rabbit. And a few hours later, he came back dragging a great big ladder. But to his astonishment, he saw Frog, and Frog was sitting, waiting for him on the ground, and he was out of the hole. And Rabbit said, my friend Frog, how? What happened? I went to get help, and here you are. You don't need my help at all. What is going on? And Frog said, oh, Rabbit, my friend, when you left, a snake entered that hole. I had to get out. And that is my story for you today. So I hope that you have enjoyed these 3 stories. If you did, please do retell them, because stories need to be retold. They want to be told. So if you enjoyed them, please do share them with other people. But thank you very, very much for joining me at the Solas Festival. And I hope that you enjoy a lot of the other things that are going on. But I shall leave you with Kirsty, who is going to finish this session for us. But thank you very much. And hopefully I shall see you another time soon.
Thank you so much, Mara, for those stories and lessons. And I hope everyone else enjoyed or was as worried about the baby as I was. So I want to say a big hello to Alex and to Raphael and to Eve, because I know you're all watching live. If anyone else is watching live, do share the link with friends so they can watch this later as well. And just to say, remember to visit solasfestival.co.uk so you can check out all the other events that are on across this weekend. And we have Mr. Boom on Zoom tomorrow at 10:30 for the kids. You do need to sign up to that in advance, so you can go to the website and do that there if you'd like to join that session. And we also have our big virtual Kaylee tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So that'll be a lot of fun as well. So we'll see you at one of the next events.